Hi everyone, this is therapist Bryan Blakeny out of Houston, Texas. This is my 10th year of private practice. It's been a long day. Hopefully I don't look too beat up. I'm going to share with you some insights on happiness today that I think will be new for you. We'll also dispel some myths. I'll share with you some, hopefully some cool metaphors for you, some practical things, steps that you can actually take to notice a marked difference or increase in how you feel and your level of happiness overall. The first thing is to know that happiness is not necessarily something that can be pursued. The more you try to, the more you chase it, in many ways, the more it tends to escape us. So happiness really is something that is something we achieve within. It's an inward, outward process. We certainly try our best to make changes in our physical environment to make a difference. But if our attitudes, our beliefs and attitudes don't shift, then the external changes just tend to be temporary, as you may have experienced. The other thing is our expectations. What we expect of life makes a huge difference. It's important to expect the best, also knowing that we need to consider that life obviously isn't perfect. It doesn't always go as planned. And so it's important to be aware of what your blueprint is. So all of your hopes, your expectations of how you want life to play out, those play a big role in your experience, your perception of happiness. So for example, if growing up you expect to be able to be making, $100,000 a year, and that's your idea of success, that's a blueprint. If you're not making that and you're not matching that blueprint from when you were younger, well, at some level you may feel that either you're inadequate, not good enough. There's just something not right. So you might be pushing yourself, beating yourself up to reach that $100,000 a year goal if that was part of your blueprint. So just be aware of your expectations. Make sure that your blueprint hopefully is realistic and something that really is in alignment with your values. So this is another key to happiness, is living your values. What are the things that are most important to you? Along the way, another myth that I'd like to dispel is that happiness actually is somewhat genetic. So there's a genetic component, there is a social component to it, and some of it within our own control. So some estimate that 40% of happiness is actually within our control. I think it's estimated 40% is genetic. Perhaps only 10% of happiness is based on circumstance. We can think of a lot of spiritual people that have learned to be happy in pretty horrific circumstances. So that right there shows us that if we think of Mother Teresa or Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, another number of people, many of the great messengers that suffered, they made the best of their circumstances, and they showed us that happiness is something that comes from, it is a state of mind first and foremost. And so next thing I share with you, I'll jump in and share with you a metaphor that you might like, and that is this is our first exercise in practicing and actually experiencing what happiness can be like. The first element of this metaphor, it's a metaphor dealing with being in a room with butterflies. If you've ever experienced resistance, not that you have, right? We all know what it's like to experience resistance in life, where there's just something that we're not willing to accept. And we can feel that tension inside of us. So what I'd like you to consider is, imagine you're in a room with butterflies. And the goal of being in this room is to have as many butterflies. Imagine it was a competition. Everyone's in a separate room. And the goal is to see how many people, or how quickly you can get all of the butterflies to rest on you. Okay, so imagine that for a moment. Take a moment, be still. You're in the room with the butterflies. Your goal is to get as many butterflies to rest on you as possible. What do you do? What's your strategy? Can you go around with a net, scooping them up, demanding? Imagine if you whack them with a fly swatter and glue them on you. I mean, some people might strategically say, well, you didn't, you didn't share all the ground rules. I'll just kill a bunch of them and glue them onto me. Will that work? That's kind of like when we aggressively pursue happiness. Yeah, we might have some butterflies on us, glued to us, but they're dead and starting to decay. So take a moment to imagine if you were really going to attract those butterflies to you, what would you have to do? And the first thing you know is you'd have to be still, wouldn't you? And of course, if you can do anything to sweeten yourself, to sweeten your personality, that certainly makes a difference. Okay? If there's tension, imagine how any tension or anxiousness or frustration keeps the butterflies away. Imagine that they're sensitive enough that they can really tell what your mood, your attitude, your emotions are like. So that stillness, that still space attracts the butterflies, and that is the lack of resistance. Okay? Any resistance keeps the butterflies away. So the longer it takes you, part of this journey is the longer it takes you to be still and attract the butterflies, perhaps the more resistance that you might be dealing with in your life. So think about that for a moment. And what's neat about this metaphor of the butterflies is I was facilitating a group one day of maybe 10, 15 people, and it just came to me. It just flowed out, and I was like, wow, got it. That's a perfect metaphor. It made sense to me, and ever since it's been a gold mine for me and many others in this process. It's also in the book that I've written. It's called Top Secret: Declassifying the Meaning of Life. You can find on Amazon. Again, it's called Top Secret: Declassifying the Meaning of Life. I have 2 sections on that. I have a chapter that addresses happiness in great detail. So the more metaphor of the butterflies, try that. See what that's like for you to actually be still. Notice any tension, any resistance. Allow yourself to observe that tension lifting in the process, and see how many butterflies you can attract. The more you practice this, the quicker you're able to attract the butterflies metaphorically to you, and the more peace, the more quickly you're able to bring yourself into a place of peace. Okay. Another metaphor that I'll share with you is holding a ball. So if you imagine climbing up, you're up halfway up a mountain, and you're holding a giant beach ball. If you drop that ball, what happens? Well, obviously gravity's going to pull it down. The goal is you want the ball at the top of the mountain. In order to get the ball at the mountain, you've got to be willing to hike up. It's a journey of taking it up. If you throw the ball, it may go up for a little bit, but it's going to roll back down. So you actually have to take it one step at a time. You have to be present with it. So the key to happiness is presence. If you drop the ball, it starts rolling down. The longer you wait, dropping the ball is when, we lose our crap. We get upset, we're agitated, we're in a piss poor mood for hours and maybe days at a time. We sink into depression and agitation. The longer it takes you, when you drop that ball, the longer it takes for you to go after that ball and gain control of it again. The longer it takes, the harder it is to get it, and the harder it is to shift your mood. So the quicker, when you notice yourself dropping that ball and you're out of your happiness and you're out of your peace, try your best to get that ball as quickly as you can. Shift your mood. Take responsibility. Take control of your mood and your emotions as best you can. Bring yourself back. Bring that ball back up to the mountain, and just know, in future, the moment you lose your cool and your stuff, as quickly as you can, shift your emotional state, and over time you gain momentum with practice, and that starts to feel good. I'm still in the process of mastering it, so I too have my days and challenges, just like everybody. But we try to get back on the horse as it said, and we try to grab that ball and get back into place. Another thing that I want to mention to you briefly about happiness is that we all have an emotional set point for our happiness, which many of you have come across, which I find really fascinating. And that is that anyone that has experienced maybe winning the lottery or a tragedy or a tremendous setback in life, you may have noticed that let's say the person that wins the lottery turns out within about a year of winning the lottery, their level of happiness is really not much greater than before they won the lottery. So we end up often coming back within about a year. We end up coming back to our baseline. And so if you realize that whatever you can, the key is you want to work on your baseline. You don't necessarily want these overwhelming sensations or pursuit of overwhelming joy, because you're ultimately going to probably come back to where you tend to live most of life. So just keep that in mind in terms of your expectations. So with that, that also is in terms of a trauma or a tragedy as well. So even someone that some cases that people have dealt with loss of loved ones, being paralyzed, all kinds of hardships and tragedy. Oftentimes within a year, they tend to be back to that general baseline where they were before the incident. So keep that in mind, that we all have a baseline that we tend to come back to, and that can help with your expectations. That more than trying to reach these highs, that we basically we try to really work on what our baseline is, and that deals with our expectations, our blueprints, our willingness to take responsibility for how we feel, to know that we are not prisoners of our emotion. If you can try to remember that, it's a tough one, I think, for all of us. So keep that in mind. Another last metaphor that you might like with happiness is that of a bobber. The bobber on top of the water when you're fishing, it wants to be on top. And if there's a fish pulling it down, then the bobber sinks down. So what I'd like you to consider is that another element that keeps us from happiness are our attachments. Really be aware of what are you attached to in order to be or to feel that you need to be happy. This is a struggle for all of us, especially because we have basic human needs, emotional, psychological, physical, spiritual needs that need to be met. And we have to be careful about our attachment to those needs and figuring out which ones are absolutely needs and which ones are just really strong wants and desires. Anytime we are attached to something, that pulls the bobber down. And when the bobber comes below the surface, we're less happy. Okay, we're sinking. The bobber's sinking. So just be aware of, just like holding to that fishing line, that any attachments are likely to pull the bobber down below the surface. Anytime you're unhappy, you can ask yourself, what are you attached to? And that can, in letting go, once again, that resistance, letting go, coming back to the room with the butterflies, allow yourself to be at peace. Invite the butterflies in that still space. The agitation, the frustration, that urgent need and frustration to be somewhere that you're not tends to be a barrier to your happiness. Final thought that you might like is that pleasure comes from the body. Of course, pleasure in its pursuit is temporary. It lasts as long as a fresh cup of coffee. Whatever it is your interest, your vice, your pleasure, it's temporary. Okay. Happiness is in the mind and thinking, and as we know, that thinking tends to, sways. Emotions are very much in line and a mirror of our thoughts, which are always changing. So just be careful that you're aware that happiness can be, if it's just tied to your thoughts, then it may be quite unstable. Ultimately, we want to get to the third element, and that is joy, and that is more sustainable. Joy is actually found in the spirit, and it's in the nurturing of virtues, in creating what is often called in positive psychology, is referred to as the meaningful life. And that is where we identify what are our highest values, what qualities do you live by, what qualities are part of your purpose. For me, growing up from a young age, it's been kindness. I strive for kindness. None of us are perfect, but that's been a very high ideal for me. So kindness, courtesy, think of patience, love, humility, generosity, patience. So many qualities that are important to us. So when you're aware of what the virtues are that shine through you and you want to shine, when you engage them meaningfully in the service of others, this constitutes what's called the meaningful life. And this is where the highest level of happiness, the happiest people in the world, are engaging their virtues in the well-being, the service to others, reaching out beyond themselves. So think about how you can identify what your values are, connect them to a higher sense of service. So just to conclude, happiness is in thought, pleasure is in the body, and joy is in the spirit, connected to our virtues and our service. Find your butterflies, invite the butterflies in your life to come and rest on you. Find that still space, sweeten your spirit, be aware of your expectations, and don't be afraid to reach out and stretch in new ways. Don't be afraid to go into that still space that for many people is actually very frightening. Taking the time to be still and to meditate and reflect is often terrifying for many people because we're not sure what we might really find inside. A lot of people aren't content with what's on the inside. So reach out, be bold, allow yourself to be happy. Don't pursue it so much, but just allow the peace, allow the resistance to fade. And you'll actually notice that with practice, overall you'll be much happier. You'll still have your down moments. You know, we all have our ebbs and flows, but overall that you'll notice that that you're sustaining that joy a lot more. Okay, hope this helps. Feel free to drop me a line at Blakeny, Blakeny, Blakeny at eqeducation.com. You should see a link below. And my website, just in case, is bryanblakenytherapy.com. I have a book on Amazon. It's called Top Secret: Declassifying the Meaning of Life. Look forward to being with you soon, and have a great afternoon and evening.